Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are closing in on the beginning of spring training for 2041. Has not been the most active off season for our Buffalo Wings. Really only one free agent signing, Daniel Rojas, first baseman who we viewed as the top hitter on the market, signed him for 4 years at $30 million a season. He is in his mid-30s. He's coming off of the best year of his career. Hopefully he will be a very important bat for our lineup going forward, but certainly some degree of risk given his age and the amount of that contract, given that our player payroll is not generally in the top half of the league, because we do like to invest a fair amount in scouting and player development. We've recently made a number of minor league contract offers, basically all to pitchers, just trying to improve the depth of our minor league organization. And we're kind of following the Dralick's approach to international amateur free agency. At this point, we signed 2 players we really liked by going a bit above their initial demands. We don't really have enough money at this point for Juan Aguirre, who is a free agent internationally that we liked. So we're going for 3 lower priced players: Lupe Zaragoza, Juan Scaligieri, and Luis Villegas. You can see we can sign the 3 of them for less than it was going to potentially cost us to get Aguirre if we used every penny that we had on him. And at this point, Mr. Aguirre is looking for more than every penny we have. So going to adapt a little bit and hopefully sign a couple of lower quality international amateur free agents to hopefully round out our international complex. Still a few interesting-ish players available in free agency. The preseason starts in just a few days, and then spring training is just over a month away. If the prices on some of these players come down materially, or they're actually willing to accept a minor league contract with major league options, may revisit things with some of them. Don't really need a ton of pitching, but certainly would be tempted by a couple of the pitchers that are still available. Notably, Chris Bloomquist, most particularly, has a pretty impressive profile, but he's still looking for $16 million a year, so unrealistic for us to try to bring him on board at this point. And before we get rolling forward with the episode, hopefully get most of those minor league pitching contracts that we had offered signed in the coming week or two. I just wanted to, as I sometimes do, comment on the biggest news of the day in the baseball world. And clearly over the weekend, Ohtani signing with the Dodgers for $700 million was the news of the day, news of the week, news of the year, news of the century, as far as sports and business, and obviously an incredible player. I know that a lot of the money supposedly is deferred to make it more palatable for the Dodgers from a competitive balance tax perspective, but not knowing what type of pitcher he's going to be coming back from his latest injury seems like just an insane amount of money to spend. I hope the contract goes well for him and the contract goes well for the Dodgers. I will say this, though, I was left feeling a little empty. It seemed like this could have been something that really celebrated baseball, and with Ohtani's camp being so insistent on negotiations being hush-hush and threatening teams who leaked anything that they might not get his services, kind of took a lot of joy out of the process. And then, most perhaps hypocritically, it was Dave Roberts of the Dodgers several days ago who leaked that they had a meeting with Ohtani, and Ohtani and his camp kind of showed that all their talk about keeping things secret really didn't matter when there was $700 million on the table, and can't blame them for that. don't see myself ever being in a situation where I'll have even a fraction of that money on the table. But they did kind of show it was all about the money, and they were just trying to control the process because they felt they had the leverage to control the process. And it would have at least been a bit refreshing if they had stuck to their guns and said, no, we're not going to sign with you guys on the Dodgers because Roberts leaked this information. But as is often the case, they ultimately followed the money and just showed that they wanted to control things because they felt they could, which is a little bit phony to me, but it is what it is. We'll see what happens. Clearly, it makes the Dodgers a better offensive team, and very well likely in the coming years at some point will make them a much better pitching team as well. So would expect that they will be a threat to compete for many years to come. And we've simmed ahead close to a week or so at this point. Luis Zaragoza, center field prospect that we mentioned, is now looking for more than the money that we have left as far as international amateur free agents. So he will not be joining our team. But we did sign two of the other players, and they were both looking for about $210,000 each. So got them at a little bit of a discount to asking price. Pitching prospect Juan Scaligieri, really a reliever prospect, although he's listed as a starter. It's just going to depend on some positive talent change randomness in terms of his development for him to ultimately be a major leaguer. But he's a 17-year-old with ground ball tendencies who throws in the mid-90s. Certainly something to potentially work with there on him. And then we also signed with the right fielder, Luis Villegas. Like his high work ethic, a little bit of ability to hit some homers and draw some walks potentially. Again, just another body to the system in our farm system that hope that the more players that you throw at it, the more you might get lucky with. And think that both Villegas and Scaligieri should nicely supplement our two big picks, which you remember would be David Mojica, the starting pitching prospect, who we thought was the best pitching prospect out there, and also Arturo Casares, who we felt was a pretty good outfielder prospect. So happy with the class of four, and still have $190,000 less to maybe sign another player or two before all is said and done. And we've made it to the start of spring training. As is our custom, we will go with 6 pitchers in the starting rotation during spring to get a look at as many people as possible. Our top 3 from last year will be back in Barajas, Mendoza, and Shazier. Eric Barbarita, who was our 5th starter last year but went 14-3 with a 2.72 ERA, is the favorite to be the 4th starter this year. And then we'll take a better look at 2 big prospects. Jim Lance, number 7 prospect in all of baseball, pitched well with us at the end of last season. Think he could be a very important part of this rotation going forward. And then Luis Palencia, another guy who last year was a combined 16-5 between AA Utica and AAA Albany. Take a look at him, although it's conceivable he could begin the season at AAA Albany. And turning to our position players, we've got a high number for us in camp with 31 position players in camp this year. Our potential starting catcher, Mitch Houlihan, still recovering from that ruptured Achilles tendon that was suffered last August. He is clearly not Aaron Rodgers as far as his ability to recover faster than most mortals. Hopefully we will get to see Houlihan the last week of spring training. In the meantime, we're just trying to give as many players playing time as possible here in the spring. And hopefully, other than the injury to Houlihan, he will get recovered and we can get through these 4 weeks of spring training without any significant injuries that are going to impact this team that we expect to be competitive again this upcoming season as we try to make the playoffs for a 14th consecutive year. And we did just suffer an important injury, hopefully one that won't be crippling, but certainly, to use the expression that I like to use often, not optimal. The youngster Alejandro Contreras going to be out for about 6 weeks with a strained ab. Expected him to be in the mix to be our starter at second, third, or shortstop. He definitely was going to be starting somewhere for us. So disappointing that he will miss the start of the season. Should be an opportunity for a surprise player to perhaps make our infield. At least get a look at that player. We did just sign Van Trahan to a minor league contract with major league options. We're really just hoping to stash him in AAA, but we may be on the hook if we decide to have him on the 26-man roster to be paying him a major league contract, which is not really our goal. So tend to think he won't make the team, and we'll continue to use him more as organizational depth. But Contreras will be on the IL for the rest of spring training and likely the first couple weeks of the regular season. And as we get about a week and a half away from the start of the regular season, the injury situation in the infield is getting rough. Tegan Tiley, who is likely going to be having a more significant role with the injury to Contreras, out with a back strain. Hopefully it should only be 5 days, but the 28-year-old is now wrecked physically at this point. So hopefully he will be healthy for the beginning of the regular season. We intended him to be in a utility role, even with Contreras being hurt. Given Tiley's injury proneness, we'll try to ensure that he either is only playing against left-handed pitching or in more of a pure utility role for us to hopefully keep him somewhat healthy until we hopefully get Contreras back in 3 to 4 weeks. Positive news is starting catcher Mitch Houlihan is back from his injury, that Achilles, still fragile as far as his injury proneness. Only been around the last couple of days in spring training, but should get a little bit of playing time over the next week or so, week plus, until we head north to Buffalo. Well, in an example of the lack of context award, Tylen Hotaling, who's in a battle to make the team as a fourth or fifth outfielder for us, apparently was injured while doing work on his farm. I don't exactly know where his farm is in relation to our spring training location in Florida. Hotaling is from Texas, but apparently the 25-year-old who was fighting for a roster spot has suffered a farm injury, and we'll see whether he can make the team despite the fact that he'll likely be injured as of opening day. And despite the fact we moved on from one of our longtime starting pitchers who happened to be a two-way player in Juan Estrada this past offseason, feel like our pitching staff is going to be in real good shape. Looking at our 6-man rotation, Eric Barbarito at 3.46 and Alexis Barajas at 3.38 had the worst ERAs among the 6 starting pitchers we looked at. Likely will end up being a numbers game for Luis Palencia. He only did pitch 9 games in Albany last year. He was very good in them. Certainly looks like he's probably ready for the majors in terms of his abilities. Does still have some more growth that we think can take place. So rather than have him pitching an inning or two occasionally out of the bullpen, we'll probably end up starting him down in AAA just to get him regular action and also delay his clock for potential arbitration a tiny bit. But going to be some interesting decisions to make as far as what this pitching staff looks like and what this roster ends up looking like. But we've made it to the end of spring training now. And when we think about the injured list, Contreras still 2 weeks away from potentially coming back. And then Tylen Hotaling, who, as we mentioned, is on the bubble to make the roster as a fourth or fifth outfielder, still has about 1 week of recovery time from that farming injury. And we're getting down to the position where we're going to be making our final cuts. We've got it down to 15 position players, so we need to make room for a couple more. No surprises, Barrios and the starter Houlihan are going to be our catchers. No surprises in the infield either, given that we've had some injuries. Well, actually, there is one surprise because of the fact that Alejandro Contreras is hurt. Rojas, Seifu, Andrews, and Tegan Tiley all make the team as expected. But Mike Whitehead, the 23-year-old who was a former first-round draft pick of ours, number 8 overall in the supplemental round, so number 42 overall, but 8th in the supplemental first round back in 2035. Only had 129 at-bats in AAA last year, but given his really good infield range and the fact that we're short an infielder with the injury to Contreras, figured we would give the youngster the opportunity to likely play every day in the majors until Contreras is back, and then he could end up back in the minors perhaps. So we've got a bunch of outfielders, and we need to make some decisions. Coma Duran was our starting first baseman last year. He's listed as a left fielder now, but between him and Daniel Rojas, feel like first base is pretty well covered. Juan Romero will be back. Josh Porter will be back. Mike Broughton will be back, largely because he's one of the few left-handed bats that we have. Really just the catcher Houlihan, the infielder slash corner outfielder Luis Coma Duran, and Mike Broughton as left-handed hitters in our lineup. Tylen Hotaling still dealing with that farm injury, probably has a chance to make the team given that he would be another left-handed bat once he's healthy. But with that injury, he will be, actually we'll probably put him on the IR. He's still got 2 option years left, but if he ends up making, if we decide we want to have him on the major league team, would rather not have him potentially have used up an option. So we are going to place Mr. Hotaling on the 10-day injured list, and then that brings us down to one final decision to make. And I'm going to be changing these lineups. I'm just looking at what our manager recommends, but clearly we'll be updating those, or maybe not clearly we'll be updating those, but I will be going with who I want rather than what the manager recommends in those lineups. He doesn't see Ben Elmquist in a starting role for us, which I may agree with. Elmquist is a right-handed hitter, so his spot is in jeopardy. But Elmquist is still a guy who's hit 287 with a 116 WRC plus over the course of almost 800 major league at-bats, largely as a fourth outfielder for us, coming off of a disappointing year for him last year, but still going to keep him up. And that puts us in a position where ultimately it's going to come down to Jesus Rivera, who spent the entire season up in the majors a year ago, hit 256 in 219 at-bats, or Ishmael Velasco, 23-year-old former international amateur free agent signing, spent most of last year in AAA Albany, where he put up a 115 WRC plus, and he was a league average hitter in 51 at-bats with us in September of last year. And because Velasco is a switch hitter, and we're righty heavy right now, that's going to mean that Rivera is going to be making a trip down to the minors with the one option year that he has left, almost 26 years old. Certainly not the news that he probably wanted to receive here on March 29th at the end of spring training. But Rivera, we knew we were going to have a real tough numbers game in terms of our outfielders. Rivera finds himself on the outside looking in right now. And as I mentioned, with Hotaling on the injured list for about another 8 days in terms of his IL time. we could have another interesting decision to make among our young outfielders when Ho-tailing is back, given that I would not mind having a fourth left-handed bat on the 26-man roster. And thinking about the 13 pitchers that we're going to take north with us, basically came down to one pretty difficult decision. We have a somewhat similar situation with our pitching staff that we do with our hitters, where we're very righty heavy, with the loss of the lefty Juan Estrada, who had been the one lefty in our rotation for most of the past decade. We only have 3 lefties to potentially bring north with us: David Espinoza, our stopper, Nate Ruckel, and the lefty swingman Ben Borgen. And we are actually going to make our bullpen a little less flexible for our manager by sending down the lefty Ben Borgen. He's one of the few guys who still has option years left. He's pitched well for us at the major league level, a 2.44 ERA over 84 and 2/3 innings. He is a guy who has the arsenal to start, although his stamina is a bit limited. I don't love that we're only going to be bringing 2 lefties north with us, but by sending Mr. Borgen down to AAA Albany, that does allow us to keep Nelson Davila, who you may remember is the Rule 5 pick we picked up from the Dodgers. He's only made it as far as high A ball. Now, he was very good in high A ball last year, but when I look at his pitching ratings, I look at a guy who throws in the mid-90s, I look at a guy who's got 3 pretty good pitches. I'm willing to give him a chance at the major league level. He's also durable, 23 years old, so he's cheap. And he was good with a 2.16 ERA in the spring for us. Granted, if you had looked carefully, Borgen was also really good in the spring. But we've got an option on Borgen. Would assume that he would be the first player up to give us a third lefty out of the bullpen if we have any injuries or severe ineffectiveness. But the rotation is Barajas, Mendoza, and Shazier back at the top 3. Barbarito promoted to the number 4 starter, and then the rookie Jim Lance will be our 5th starter. I'm going to still work on defining all the roles in the bullpen, but Joe Scott will be back as our closer. Nate Ruckel will be back as our stopper. Likely some mix of Robbie Farrell, Damari Hainsworth, and Elvin Jimenez will be our setup men. One of them will likely join Mike Waters as a middle reliever. And then Espinoza, the left-hander, and Nelson Davila will be our final 2 people to make the team in either middle relief and or long relief roles for us. And we made it to opening day. No surprise that owner Joel Farmer expects us to at least make the playoffs. I certainly expect that too. It would be a 14th consecutive year. Before we finish up the episode, let's take a look at the preseason predictions. Over in the AL East, the Guardians expected to edge out the Brewers and the Tigers, and the Twins expected to edge the Las Vegas A's in the American League West. Taking a look at our National League, and we are expected to be on the periphery of the playoffs this year. 85 and 77, 3 games behind the Expos and a couple games behind the Braves is our projection this year. And with those 85 wins, we would be the first team out of the playoffs. The Rockies would get the 4th and final wild card spot with an 86-win season. So although ownership is expecting us to make the playoffs, and I'm expecting us to make the playoffs, the simulation we just ran through suggests that we will have a 33-game deterioration from the 118 wins that the Buffalo Wings put up a year ago. Taking a look at the top hitters, nobody on Buffalo expected to be in that list. A little bit disappointing, perhaps, after we just made the big free agent acquisition of Rojas this past offseason. And no Buffalo pitchers projected to be among the top pitchers in the game either. So could be an interesting season for us. We were still 15-12, had a winning record in the spring, half a game behind the Braves and the Expos. But expectations, at least by the media, are lower for us than they have been in quite some time. And the simulation there was not particularly kind to us. Take a quick look at the waiver wire here for those of you who like us to spend some time with that. And realistically, you probably would have liked us to have shown it to you a day or two ago in game time. But it is what it is. Don't really necessarily see anyone on the list. Ramiro Velasco looks like he's got a lot of potential according to our scout, although we don't really know all that much about him. But as a first baseman, fragile, probably not a guy that we would look to put on this team. Luis Prieto, a guy with some potential. I don't know that I like him as much as our backup infielders. Lazaro Savonarola. I believe he was a guy that we looked at in the past. I think perhaps when he was coming out in the draft. Pretty interesting pitcher there, making $3 million. Or maybe he was a international free agent. The name is definitely familiar. We picked him up in the Rule 5 draft a few years ago, and then we sent him back to the Orioles. Maybe that's why he sounded so familiar to us, because he was on our team, and then he didn't end up making the roster a few years ago, but certainly has an interesting profile. If he was a lefty, I'd probably take a swing at him. Orrin Walters, a decent right-handed pitching prospect at 24 years old, but our pitching, I think, is so deep that we're probably not going to go after any of those players. But we will find out the final decisions that we make as far as what our lineups are going to be at the start of the next episode. And in the next episode, we'll also play opening day of this 2041 baseball season and to see if we can do well against the Phillies on the road on April Fool's Day 2041. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.